No chains, no whips, no iron at all, only signatures, screens, and a ticking clock that never sleeps. The most powerful form of bondage in history doesn't shackle the body, it narrows the choices, throttles the time, and prices the future. Debt doesn't break your back, it bends your horizon. And once you see the design, you can't unsee it. You're watching Hidden Finance, where we decode the power structures embedded in money and the stories they don't teach in school. Today, we travel from ancient temples to modern server farms, tracing how debt became the quiet architecture of control. How interest measured in points and percentages became a system of obedience more enduring than any chain. Stay with us because the history of debt is really a history of who gets to decide what your time is worth. Debt is a promise stretched across time, a small deal that, when multiplied by millions of people and billions of dollars, becomes a social order. It can build cities, educate children, and fuel innovation. It can also extract, discipline, and trap. The magic hand menace comes from compounding, numbers that grow not in lines but in curves. What starts as a manageable obligation becomes a force that leans on your choices every morning you wake up, urging you to say yes when you want to say no. Our story begins where writing itself began, Mesopotamia, the land of ledgers. Temples and palaces extended seasonal loans of grain and silver to farmers and traders, betting on harvests and voyages. Interest was standard, often double-digit, and when harvests failed, debts piled up quickly. The consequences weren't abstract. People could be forced to sell their labor, their land, even their children. Rulers discovered a brutal truth. Too much debt breaks society, so they invented a pressure valve. Periodically, kings proclaimed Amargi, clean slates wiping out personal debts and freeing debt servants, because mercy wasn't kindness alone. It was stability. Greece and Rome took the experiment further. In Athens, the poor once pledged their freedom as collateral, chained to markers on their land until sold in Caesarea. The shaking off of burdens abolished debt bondage and freed those sold into slavery. Rome drafted contracts known as nexum, which allowed creditors to seize a person's body for unpaid loans, until a scandal in a revolt forced its abolition. Even in the classical world, leaders learned that when creditors overreach, republics tremble. Debt could discipline citizens, but unmanaged, it could also incinerate a society's legitimacy. During the medieval era, the church condemned usury interest itself as a sin, but commerce found workarounds. Italian city-states invented bills of exchange, allowing traders to disguise interest in currency shifts and time delays. Double-entry bookkeeping gave merchants a new superpower to track distant promises as if they were cash in hand. Then came 1694, the founding of the Bank of England. A group of financiers lent the crown money to wage war, and in return, they received privileges to issue bank notes combining private profit with public power. The modern national debt was born, and with it, a new empire financed not by loot alone, but by bonds. If the state could harness debt to project power, employers could harness it to control labor. In colonial mines and company towns, wages often arrived as scrip spendable only at the company store credit as a leash. After the American Civil War, freedom meant new shackles. Sharecroppers perpetually owed landlords for seed, tools, and rent. Peonage laws and convict leasing turned debts and fines into forced labor. Newspapers didn't call it slavery, they called it law and order. Chains were replaced by contracts, and the ledger replaced the whip. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, another kind of chain tightened deflation under the gold standard. When prices fell, debts didn't, they grew heavier. In the Great Depression, economist Irving Fisher called it debt deflation, where falling prices magnify the real burden of what you owe. Bank failures cascaded, farms were seized, and families were driven off the land. Franklin Roosevelt shut the banks, devalued the dollar against gold, and rewired finance with deposit insurance, admitting a hard reality. In a crisis, rules bend to preserve the system. Debt could no longer be left to the invisible hand. In 1944, the victors of World War II met at Bretton Woods to make new rules for the world's money. Currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar anchored to gold became global cash. The IMF and World Bank were created to provide financial first aid and long-term development loans. For a generation, capital controls and stable exchange rates tamed some of the old chaos. But beneath the tranquility, a truth sharpened: whoever issues the world's reserve currency doesn't just print money, they set the terms of other nations' debts. Then came 1971, the Nixon shock, when the United States severed the dollars tied to gold. The anchor snapped, the ocean moved, oil prices exploded, and petrodollars flooded global banks, which recycled that money into loans to Latin America and beyond. When Paul Volcker at the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates to crush inflation, the tide reversed overnight. Mexico's 1980 to default opened a decade of crisis across the developing world, the lost decade, as countries saw debt service devour social spending. The medicine structural adjustment, austerity, privatization was prescribed in the name of efficiency but often delivered as pain. In the 1990s, new storms formed. East Asian economies grew fast under managed finance and currency pegs, then collapsed in 1997 when hot money ran out as fast as it rushed in. IMF rescue packages came with conditions: raise rates, sell assets, cut budgets, measures that stabilized some currencies but snapped livelihoods. Russia defaulted in 1998, Argentina in 2001. And each time the story included the same characters: creditors demanding payment, rating agencies issuing grades that became fates, and ordinary citizens paying in jobs, savings, and years of opportunity. In Europe after 2010, Greece became the emblem of a currency union with no fiscal union, tight rules, harsh medicine, and a generation forced to leave. Meanwhile, the household revolution in credit rewired daily life. The credit card, once a novelty, became a pocket passport to instant consumption. Scores FICO, introduced in 1989, turned trust into a number that a machine could read in milliseconds, rewarding obedience and punishing mistakes. Mortgages were bundled into securities, sliced into tranches, stamped with ratings, and sold around the world until the illusion cracked in 2008. Subprime borrowers defaulted, derivatives multiplied losses, and banks that had seemed invincible demanded rescue. Bailouts stabilized the system, but the message was searing. In finance, some debts are too sacred to forgive and others are too big to fail. Control isn't always a barked order. It is often a quiet design. Late fees, penalty rates, teaser offers that reset, and negative amortization loans build profit by stretching pain over time. Student debt in the United States became a kind of passport stamp you can't remove, hard to discharge in bankruptcy, easy to miss payments on when wages lag tuition. Wage garnishment, court fees, and fines can turn a missed bill into a legal trap, especially for the poor. And the credit score opaque, algorithmic, and unforgiving nudges behavior without ever raising its voice. Pay on time, stay in line, or pay more for existing at all. Sovereign control works by a similar logic, only bigger. Sanctions and access to global payment systems like SWIFT can freeze a nation's financial arteries in days, making policy as enforceable as law. Ratings from a handful of agencies can push yields up or down, pushing reforms onto ballots without elections. China's Belt and Road Initiative has added a new chapter: infrastructure financed by loans rather than grants, with projects that sometimes struggle to pay for themselves. Some call it debt trap diplomacy, though evidence is complicated. Many outcomes come from local politics, cost overruns, and global slowdowns rather than a master plan. Yet the effect rhymes with history. When repayments falter, leverage grows. Whoever holds the paper holds a say. Technology has accelerated the tempo. By now, pay later spreads small debts across millions of screens, normalizing a life paid in installments. FinTech underwrites in seconds using data you never knew were scored: phone behavior, purchase patterns, even the time of day you shop. Central bank digital currency CBDC promises faster, cheaper payments, but also raises questions. If money becomes code, can rules become programming? Only spend on X not after midnight expires in 30 days. The line between protection and control isn't a line at all, it's a policy choice. But it's never the full picture to say debt equals slavery and stop there. Debt in fair systems is a ladder. Mortgages build homeowner wealth. Municipal bonds finance schools and subways. And entrepreneurs scale ideas that transform lives. The question is not whether we use debt. It's how we design the terms, share the risks, and enforce the rules. Throughout history, societies have recognized this and hit reset. Ancient jubilees, New Deal restructurings, and modern initiatives like HIPC and the Jubilee 2000 campaign, which forgave the debts of many poor countries. Even now, debt for nature swaps and new frameworks try to balance repayment with survival, because balance sheets cannot outrun ecosystems forever. Every cycle raises the same test: who gets forgiveness and who gets a lecture? After 2008, banks were stabilized and homeowners were told to tough it out. After 2020, markets were levitated by central bank buying as small businesses drowned in paperwork. Students ask for relief and hear about responsibility. Corporations ask for liquidity and hear about systemic risk. This isn't hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. The system is built to guard the flows that hold it together, even when that means letting some debts vanish and others ossify into fate. So what do we do right now? At the policy level, we can choose compassionate arithmetic, simpler bankruptcy for honest but unlucky borrowers, caps on predatory rates and fees, transparent sovereign lending, and stress tests that include human cost. We can fund education without anchoring young lives to decades of payments, and we can build public options for essential credit so survival isn't an APR decision. At the personal level, literacy is armor. Understand terms, avoid compounding traps, and negotiate relentlessly because every contract is a conversation. And culturally, we can reject the moral theater that treats debt as sin for the powerless and strategy for the powerful. There's a path forward that honors both risk and dignity. It requires sunlight. Disclose who profits from every rule, every fee, every standard clause. It requires memory. History shows that when debts become unpayable, they will be paid by someone through inflation, default, taxes, or lost futures. And it requires imagination to build systems where money is a tool, not a leash. Where rescue isn't a privilege but a plan. Where freedom isn't a slogan, but time you actually own. Freedom measured not in credit limits, but in choices you can afford to make. The most dangerous chains are the ones we mistake for necessities until we remember we forged them, and we can forge something better. This is Hidden Finance. If this journey reframed how you see money's quiet power, join us, subscribe, follow, and share, so more people learn the rules written between the lines. Tell us in the comments, where have you seen the line between debt as tool and debt as trap? New episodes drop weekly, pulling back the curtain on the systems shaping your future. On YouTube and Facebook, we are Hidden Finance, where the secrets of money aren't just exposed, they're decoded.